Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Francis Houghton and Dr Chris Shambrook. Welcome to the Sports Psych Show, both of you.
Hi there.
Morning, Dan.
Morning to you both. Really excited to have you both on. Chris, this is your second time. You were a guest way back, I think it was in episode 2. Fran, your first time. Let's start by getting you both to introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience. Fran, why don't you go first?
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Dan. So, I'm Fran Houghton. I competed at 5 Olympic Games from Sydney 2000, Athens, Beijing, London, see if I can remember this in the right order, and then finally Rio in rowing. Mainly the first time was in a crew of 2 and then crews of 4. And then my last Olympics, just to make it extra complex, in a crew of 8. Really, really enjoyed it and have now put together the accumulation of my learnings over that time in a little book called Learnings from 5 Olympic Games.
Of which we're going to talk about today. And Dr. Chris Shambrook.
Yes.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dan, and great to be here with you and Fran talking about this. So, Chris Shambrook from 1997 through till 2019. I was the psychologist with the British rowing team, so I had the pleasure of supporting Fran as team psych through those 5 Olympic Games, and it's great to see the book that's been produced as a result of the fantastic learnings and experience that she's had as well. So that's kind of where the connection comes in.
And it is such an awesome book. I've really, really enjoyed going through it. So much of it resonates with me as a former competitor, as a practitioner, a sports psychologist. It's just essential reading, but I'll get on to that later. I mean, Fran, where did the idea of writing a book come from? Talk us through this book.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the last couple of years on the team, I started making notes because I really wanted to make sure I made the most of my last opportunity. I was injured at the time and I thought, you know what, how can I contribute most positively? If I do get another chance to be in a team, how can I pass on my learnings in the most meaningful way possible? And there was a moment I did make it into a team in the end for Rio. And there was a moment in the final, we were coming 6th and started gradually moving back through the field and started closing down on the Olympic champions. And we didn't beat them. We got a silver medal, but it was a fantastic silver medal. And I remember at the time just thinking, oh my goodness, I changed my mindset a couple of years ago. I've tried to accumulate everything into something that is workable for everyone around me. And this is just, we've been through so many ups and downs. This is a story I just feel like I really need to share. And my original intention was not to sort of write a book and sort of push it out into the world, but more accumulate it as a thank you to those that had helped me along the way, and just, sort of articulate and to clean it all up and put it together and send it to a few coaches and support staff and just say, look, this is what we did together. Thank you for being there with me. So that's what the urge was from the start.
Well, I love that intrinsic notion. I suppose articulating what you did for me is going to help a lot of people understand what an Olympian goes through on a day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year basis. It's a book with so much insight, and I suppose, Chris, you've read the book. It must be like 20 years of psychosocial learning being reflected back to you.
I think really importantly, it's Fran's reflecting back of the meaningful stuff that took on more and more meaning for her as well. So I think even having the confidence to synthesize it down to what's been so brilliantly synthesized in here as well is also part of what's great about this as well, because it definitely sort of, Fran's voice comes through in sort of, Spadeful. So that's the thing for me, which is sort of so wonderful to see an individual's take on stuff, and how they've made a lot of sense of stuff, and the messages that they ultimately want to share, which is that's priceless.
Well, it's a short book. It's an ideal length for me. There's loads of little graphics and illustrations that really bring to life the key technical details. There's about 5 or 6 chapters. Teams, nerves, training, debriefing, technical fundamentals, dealing with injury. And I'd like to go through each one and get some reflections from you both. And in many respects, you open up with teams, which I think is really interesting, because the impression I got, Fran, I'd love to get your comment on this, and then yours, Chris, is that, as a young rower growing up, perhaps for you, the perception was, this is just about me getting powerful, working hard, training morning, noon, and night through all weathers. And then I'm going to be really good, and then I might get to go to Olympic Games and win some medals. But it struck me that it dawned on you over time, this is also about building the capacity to team. And within that notion, understanding that who you are influences how others are able to team with you, manage their relationships with you, deal with the intricacies of your personality. Tell us a little bit about that opening chapter, teams.
Yeah, well, I think for me, ultimately, the team was the greatest reward in my whole career, and I could never achieve any of what I achieved without the people that I worked with, both physically attached to them in the boat as well as all those people around me. And I think it's simple to have that clear ambition at the start. I want to win gold at the Olympic Games. And you, in one sense, you get handed sort of an instruction manual of, well, this is the training you need to do. Put yourselves in our hands and, we'll get there. But actually, as I reflected over time, it's a bit like going to your first Olympics and think, wow, this is amazing. The second one, oh, it's a bit frustrating. The third one, that's really frustrating. And the fourth one, like, oh, okay, right, okay. Everyone on this start line is very capable. And it comes down to some other stuff, some nuance around how we work together, both every day and then also sort of holding steady in those final 24 hours on the start line within the race. And that comes down far more to the dynamics between us as people and really understanding each other. And so that's why teams was, the most significant chapter for me. And I start it off by the resonating phrase in my head was always, the ultimate team is when you can't pull another stroke for yourself, but you can for those around you. And when I looked back at the best teams I was a part of, that was one of my overriding memories, being in the middle of a race, my body and my lungs screaming, but thinking, well, I would happily sort of stop right now, but I will never do that for those around me. So it was the strongest pull of all.
Chris, did you find a lot of your work related to helping the rowers team during your period with the squads?
Definitely, there was always a combination between sort of making sure that there was a shared mental model and understanding of, for the crews, what success was for them as a unit, but also then individually how people were going to contribute to that. And it's a great balance in rowing, because it's about this constant balance between massive individual confidence to make the biggest impact from your seat, but knowing that you have to be completely dependent upon the other people, and your ability to work with them and collaborate is as important as your own contribution. There's a pretty brutal bit of the selection process that happens quite a lot, which is called seat racing, where the coaches line the athletes up in several boats, and then they sort of send them off down the course for 1,500 meters or 2,000 meters, and then they'll bring them back to the start and they'll change the order, and then the coaches will work out who consistently makes the boats go fastest by all the changes, and that's typically done in terms of a physical and technical capacity. But I think increasingly it's clear that some people get in the boat and they make it go faster simply by their presence and ability to unite the spirits and the minds. And that's something that Fran became ever more brilliant at.
What process did you go through, Fran, to become more brilliant at that? I mean, in the book, you talk about energy, you talk about positive energy in the right direction, belief in the team, you talk about trust, you talk about the importance of vulnerability.
Yeah.
It strikes me that these are skills that you had to work at over time.
I think I was always very aware that if I was rowing with anyone, the biggest thing that I could do for that person was enable them to feel safe and enable them to feel comfortable to row in their own way. Not this is how I row, come and row like I row, but I'm here to basically balance the ship for you so that you can express yourself completely freely. And I had that early on, but didn't really realize that was what I was doing until those later years. And I actually remember we had some very, very tight trials processes for that last through in the run up to Rio, the 8 that I was in. And I really didn't have a high level of skill set at that point, because I actually just switched from using 2 oars to 1. And I was in the middle of this race, and it was very, very, very tight. And I thought, you know what, I don't have the skill set with my oar to influence this. But what I can do is, to the athlete in front of me that was actually being tested at that time, I just started talking to her really calmly. And I just said, look, keep believing in yourself. It's okay. It's going to be okay. Stay calm, believe. And I think that was what I began to perceive and be much more astute to, was that in that moment, actually, everyone's trying really hard, and what can influence the outcome so much more, and the experience of it is to sort of move from the kind of panic, oh my goodness, at the end of this race, I may or may not go to the Olympics, into it's okay, how do I bring out the best from myself? And, it's just one by one, step by step. And you mentioned trust there, and I think trust was so incredibly important. And it didn't come from just shaking each other's hand and looking in the eye and agreeing to trust each other from the beginning. But it took moments like those, seeing each other at our most exposed, really actually, in holding the oar, each of us, we were holding each other's dreams in our hands. We couldn't get these results on our own and earn our seats on our own. And going through that with each other and seeing that, and seeing how far each other was prepared to push themselves for what they wanted to be a part of, that was where we really began to understand each other. And then over time, that led to respect. And I think then that led to that absolute trust under pressure.
Well, you move on to the next chapter to document in more detail about the process the women's 8 went through in 2016, where I think you won the silver medal. And I just think this is a wonderful, it's only a few pages long if we're going to describe it as a chapter, but there's some wonderful detail in here in terms of process. And I'm just going to read out a few things from notes from your training and your racing. Training: ruthless simplicity, outcome obsessed, process focused, listening to a coach, proactively keeping it simple. It's what I found with this chapter and some of the others is it's a wonderful antidote to the notion that let's say the best sports people in the world, they train really hard, they really want to win, and then when it comes to race time, they blank their mind and they just go and do it, which tends to be the pop psych viewpoint of how winning is done. And what I love about the detail in this book, and particularly this chapter, is you're emphasizing simplicity, and you're emphasizing the notion of we don't want to overthink this, yet at the same time there's detail here, there's processes in place. Not a question, guys, but for both of you, your comment on that, it sounds like there's a lot of hard work going into, between yourselves and others, the process of training to win.
Yeah. I think that this chapter is fascinating, actually, because this has not changed. Not a word of it has changed since that list that I drew up to give to the Cox and the coach. I think it was about 3 weeks before we actually left for Rio, because I knew that, as you say, there is so much that lies behind the performance. It's not just about, oh, well, I'm the fittest I've ever been, so therefore the red light's going to turn to green and I'm just going to produce it. And I'd seen time and time again, absolutely awesome crews almost forget all the building blocks that have been put in place for them to get to that point and to be able to fully express what they were able to do. So, yeah, I mean, Chris, what's your take on it?
Yeah, many are very frank, because I think, certainly from Sydney onwards, I always used to talk about, make sure you exploit the Olympics, don't let the Olympics exploit you. But in order to do that, you've got to have a pretty clear idea of, well, what does that mean to me? What do I want to keep consistent? How am I going to bring some kind of a sense of personal control and put my narrative on the Olympics, rather than sort of have the Olympics make me forget everything that's helped get me here? And that, to think about what you need to think about, and then trust yourself to think it in the moments that matter most. All of those kind of things are really important. But I think as well here, what's very clear in the notes as well, and there's great stuff reinforcing togetherness. There's great stuff reinforcing shared thinking, but there's great stuff reinforcing shared physicality and sense of togetherness and bonds. And so the rhythm word in rowing means such a lot, because that is about the feeling and the technical pattern and the moving together and the responses of the boat as all that happens. So there's a really nice rich blend here of, yes, it starts with thoughts, but it's got so much other stuff that glues you together. And I think one of the biggest challenges is, actually laying out the plans and doing all of the stuff in training, and then being able to trust that recipe is going to allow you to find out how good you can be when it comes to racing in the most important moments that matter to you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff in here. But also, I love the way that it unites everyone, doesn't it? In the list, it's the people in the boat, but the coach outside the boat, and it's kind of it is really uniting the entire team and group, rather than it simply being sort of in the boat focused.
Yeah, and I think that was something I was very conscious of, was that I knew that we would all react differently when it came to that pressurized week. And some people will inevitably and naturally, and it is the right thing for them, some of them, to be absolutely into the, okay, well, this is my opportunity to fulfill my dreams and win an Olympic medal. And so I felt like I needed to have something that was produced when we were all thinking sort of calmly and logically, that spoke to all these different personalities, and just say, that's great if the right thing for one athlete is to be thinking about winning the gold medal and motivated by that, and that will bring out their best performances. That's great for you, but let's not forget the things that have got us to the point that we've got to. That shared language of the building blocks, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
That to me is really fascinating, Fran, what you've said at the end there. It strikes me, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it strikes me that you consciously sought out teammates to understand their optimal mindset. It strikes me as well that you were conscious that somebody might have a preference in terms of, let's say, in sports psychology, we might talk about an ego orientation versus a mastery orientation. And the ego orientation is very much, I want to win gold, I want to win gold, I want to win gold. But it's also understanding that within that preference, there can be limitations. So you saying that, yes, okay, I'm going to appreciate that this athlete here is driven by winning the gold, but I'm also going to make it my business to help them stay focused on the process as well. So there's a dynamic there where they're motivated multidimensionally. I'm going to be motivated by winning gold, but I'm also going to be motivated through sticking to the process, or I'm going to be focused on the process. So I think two strands there is, you as an individual sought out your teammates to learn about them and what drove them, the nuances there, and then you consciously went about helping them manage themselves, or contributed to their self-management through understanding their drivers, their motivation.
It was that you've described it really well, and I think one thing that really helped with that was very simply I was sat quite far back in the boat in Rio, so I was in the 3 seat, which was the third person to cross the line, and I could see six people in front of me, the cocks and 5 rowers, and so even if some of those rowers in front of me were those that were absolute sort of gold focused athletes, I could see if there were any sort of unconscious things that were happening physically that perhaps I could feed back, and all of this was just I think stemmed from I'm an observer, and I think the original drive I had to win gold almost took me off track of my sort of strongest self, and actually the biggest quality, I think, as you've said, is just to seek to understand,
Yep.
and reflect that back, but not to say to anyone you need to be a certain way. It's not that. It's how can we sort of make sure all the pillars and nothing is left behind of our various capabilities, because even when we're focused on gold, there's a lot that goes into that to make sure that actually happens.
I think there's a really, really interesting sort of. There's lots of interesting paradoxes here, but actually, you sort of recognising the fact that you were an observer, Fran, as well. But when there's an outcome focus or a gold focus, you tend to be observing the future and observing from the point of the finish line backwards and sort of going, right, are we going to get there? Rather than being an observer who's just actually observing the bit of the performance that we're currently in the middle of. And that's where I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'd observed in the years before was quite often in crews, there would be a lot of talk about today, how did today go? Did we have a really good outing today? But actually, what I tried to bring was, okay, what part does today play in the end goal? Like, what bits of today do we want to keep? Which bits do we discard? And have this sort of ultimate race bag in which, like, well, today we did this aspect really well. Let's put that in the bag. Let's take, something else out and leave it behind because it wouldn't be helpful. And that's really how I've structured the book as well. Each chapter is sort of, well, these are the ingredients for me that build together to build the ultimate race, the way that I saw it. And I think when we're talking about those different perceptions as well, one of my crewmates once said to me, and she sat right behind me, and we're really, really different people. But she said, "Oh, Fran, you see the race as an art to be perfected rather than a race to be won." And I really struggled with this because I wanted to say, look, I really believe that we can win, and I would like to win the Olympic Games. Of course I would. But I know that for me, the thing that brings out my best performance is seeing it in a different way. And it just took me a long time to give myself permission to think about it in that different way.
I think what's fascinating there is I'm listening to someone talk about the tussle between the different perceptions that competitors have around how winning is done. Everyone tends to have a different language, a different set of beliefs that drive their narrative, their story. No question there, but I just think that's fascinating because you get this in rugby teams, you get this in football teams, you get the ego versus mastery orientation if we were talking specific psych terms, but in slightly more philosophical terms, which you identified there, Fran. There can be a real disparity between how people see winning, how they see winning needs to be done, or how we get to that finish line, and that's almost a real hidden mediator of whether we can be successful or not. And so whether, I don't know, Chris, do we help people get on the same page, or do we help people appreciate those differences in perception?
Well, I think the important thing is that there's there's an ongoing quest to help people appreciate that all sources of motivation and how you make sense of stuff will move you forward towards a similar end goal. So, the one athlete saying to Fran, you see it as this rather than this. That's an either or thinking rather than, well, Fran sees it as both. It just starts with this, and that is the thing that gives the control and feeds the opportunity to do the other one, where some people would go the other way around. They'd kind of start with I want this gold. How am I going to be able to focus in order to do that? And it's the appreciation of the and both of those having equal merit in pursuit of what is a similar outcome, and that's what I think is the really important thing, because there's so many stories in the history of sport where you had teams that have been completely obsessed with winning and teams that have been completely obsessed with just playing, and they're successful. So which is right? Well, they both are. So let's stop looking for single answers and let's start appreciating that there is some subtlety and choice in it.
You've both talked about observation, the importance of observing, and when we come to race day, with all of the pressure, our observation tends to turn inwards, and we tend to start to observe our nerves and experience our nerves, and that's what the next chapter is about. And this is just absolutely fascinating, Fran. It strikes me that you worked. I don't know, Fran. I'm going to be presumptuous here, which Chris and I would both say we shouldn't be as psychologists, but it strikes me that you worked hard to deal with nerves. You came up with a number of processes and techniques and philosophies to be able to deal with your nerves to get the best of your ability on race day.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I found it hard to work on them because it's a bit like, preparing for something you don't really want to do. You just think, no, I'd rather not, thanks. I don't really want to think about it. But I knew towards the end that I really needed to confront this. I felt that my whole career was, I did feel like I put expectation on myself. Of course I did. And I set myself high goals, but I did feel there was a high level of expectation on me to deliver certain things as well. And so I think early on in my career, I thought, well, I'll just get better and I'll get there, as opposed to later on in my career, well, I haven't got there yet, and I feel under pressure to deliver that. And it sort of, it really worked against me for a while until I thought, well, you know what, I actually have to release myself and not try and fulfill what others expect of me, but do this and almost process the pressure in my mind in a different way and think about it differently, but absolutely had to confront it and unpick it and say, okay, so how is it that on any given day in training, I can just walk up to the rowing machine and produce an amazing result? But when it comes to producing it, when everyone's looking at me, why do I think differently, and what can I do about that? Would you say, Chris, that was a fair reflection?
Yeah, I would. And it's interesting just reflecting on the first bit of the conversation as well, Fran, because I think the way in which you would sort of create safety for others, there was also a desire there to have someone at some point do a bit of that for you as well. So that it would just kind of, be okay for you to step into that as well. And I think it's, as having worked in the build up to Rio a lot on the challenge mindset, and so the concept of getting in control, building from a foundation of confidence, but having that curiosity approach goal mindset, but looking at the kind of psychophysiology of that. It's really interesting. You've got the note that you learned to use the nerves. If I felt tense, I'd visualize open capillaries wider for more blood flow. We know from the challenge mindset research that when you're in that control, confidence and curiosity sort of trio, that actually there is that positive physiological response that happens. But I think as well, what was really important as well was for Fran was kind of, not being the observer from the finish line and worrying about the outcome or what other people might be seeing, but actually being able to observe from the inside out, starting with how am I feeling and what does this mean? And then how am I going to use that to propel me to do what I want to do? So, just learning to resequence that from, avoiding the outcome hijack and getting into the kind of the place of safety with self through focus on the here and now and taking control of that. And I love the fact that human contact reduces stress, noting here as well, because I also think there's something really powerful in that sense of togetherness going into the pressure, where so many people feel that it's a problem to solve on their own when it comes down to those moments.
Yeah, and I think something I did observe as well over time is, sometimes we do things because we think that's what we're supposed to do. So I think I'm supposed to sort of put on like a really stern face, and I'm supposed to go and hide in a corner, or I'm supposed to raise my game, which I unfortunately late in the day realized that was not something that was me. I'm a just keep doing what I've always done thing and do it on race day as well. And really actually understanding that some people attach stress to race day because that's just what they associate with it, and really learning to see that from the outside and go, oh, that's what they're doing. It's not actually because it's stressful. It doesn't need to be stressful. It's just something that's being subconsciously attached, and that's how they're behaving.
I mean, what I love about this chapter as well, Fran, other than managing expectations and rationalizing how you feel, you actually incorporate. You talk about incorporating technical cues. So you talk about your mindset hours before, and then your mindset on the water, and then your mindset in the race. And it's really interesting to me as a sports psychologist because in the couple of pages you talk about your mindset hours before, you actually talk about some technical cues that you used, which is legs first, hips over, and loose. And then on the water, I love this sentence. You write, in my best races, I dominated the emotion with action. In my best races, I dominated the emotion with action. And then in the race, you talk a little bit about strategy, or at least that's my interpretation. Focus in on the first two strokes, no more. Keep the same pattern from first to last. Go off with rhythm. The reason I'm saying this is, again, I think that there's this notion of managing nerves through the interpretation of those nerves, understanding that this doesn't have to be the be-all and end-all, but also coming back to Chris's notion of challenge and threat states, which we've spoken quite a lot about on the Sports Psych show. A challenge state requires the building blocks of confidence, curiosity to be in an approach state, but also control. And so these technical cues, these strategical cues, not many, 2 or 3, play a big part in your capacity to enter that challenge state and diminish the possibilities of being in threat. No question there, Fran, just some thoughts.
You know what, for me, it's so interesting to hear your reflections on it. I love it. This is what I really hope will come of writing this stuff down and sort of releasing it out in the world, because, to hear the way that it sort of filters through your experiences and your knowledge is absolutely fascinating. So thank you for your reflection.
I think there's, behind all these notes as well, there's so many years of Fran being involved in writing race plans.
Yes.
And the race plans and the sort of the visualizations that have gone with that, but the race plans being written in a language where there's, well, what are the words that we're going to say, but what are we going to feel in the boat, and what would people see in terms of our physical response, and actually how will, so the real sense of very holistic planning through all of these race plans, which then get boiled down to the really simple, meaningful, what seem like overly simple cues, but actually there's so much meaning packed in between them because there's all of the other race planning that's in there. But even being able to go through that process of a relatively complex race plan with multiple kind of stimuli that are in there, but then being able to trust to know which are the things that I'm going to default to, which will then bring me kind of, a sense that I'm working through that race plan in the right way for me as well. I think that there's so much of that which is important, because the race has been raced many times beforehand in preparation, but then it's having the ability to sort of as Fran's got one of the notes here, concentration versus thinking, racing with the time to stay focused on what I knew made my speed and keep doing it, not letting my mind stray onto what I could do more of differently. So, you've got to do the pre-thinking in order to then concentrate on that stuff that is going to be most useful for you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned those race plans, Chris, because I think actually that's where really the root of this book is in distilling a huge amount of complexity into something as simple as I could possibly. This is why it's taken 4 years, me sort of standing at my kitchen sink with all my stories and thoughts with the sieve, just trying to make it as simple as possible. Because yes, as you say, we've all raced before, but we haven't raced this race before, and this crew is completely unique. Even if we've raced as the same 4 people 2 weeks ago, we're all evolving as people in our understanding of what we're doing and of each other. And so when I put together these race plans, and once I'd done it, I knew I was ready, but it was a huge mental task to distill everything that we had worked on, as Chris described, into this, okay, what is the one encompassing word that when we're in the middle of a race is going to have the right outcome, and it's going to mean the same thing to each of us and produce that same emotional and physical and technical response in one word. And for me, that was where I came to see actually a lot of the training we did, not as sort of physical training, but really in the time that we spent as crews together in the boat, as opposed to individuals. All winter would be as individuals, and then from about April until September in these crews, the physical training sort of happens anyway. That was those days and those months, those sessions as a team was really for me working out, okay, so what is our common language? What will work? What is the right way for us to think when it actually comes to it?
Well, you've neatly moved us on to training, which is the next chapter, and I can only imagine how challenging training was, just purely from the notion of probably getting up at the crack of dawn in all weathers. Henley upon Thames, I think it is, where you guys train. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, but you talked about a common language, and what I got from this was very much a shared creation here. That the planning of your training was where you talk about in the book a 3-step process: choose, do, and review. So it strikes me, I mean, just out of interest here, it strikes me that you yourselves as rowers were heavily involved in what training looked like, that it wasn't necessarily coach driven. It was perhaps a negotiation with the coach, a co-creation with the coach, that together you produced your training plan. Would that be fair, or am I slightly off there?
I'm wondering what Chris is thinking right now. Okay, I'll take the hit.
I've hit a hot button here, right?
Yeah, you've hit a hot button. This no, we were given instructions, and we were very much had to do what the prescribed training program was. But what I worked out was, even if you've been told what you have to do physically, you can manipulate and actually take a lot of control for yourself about how you use that time. And that's really where the power is. We had to trust that, it was pretty much the right recipe, which absolutely it was. I mean, goodness, so many Olympic medals from the Olympic rowing team over the time that I was a part of the team. So absolutely the ingredients were right, but that doesn't mean, and I think this is just so applicable to everyday life as well, in that, there are rules, there are restrictions, but actually what's inside our minds, we have so much capacity to think about things differently. And that's why, especially in that last crew, I tried to take that learning from my previous crews, knowing that the best ones I'd been in, we had the same instructions every year, but those best crews were the ones that were like, actually, what do we want to create from this opportunity?
Yeah, and that's really important, Fran, because there's the training program, Dan, and it's Caversham where most of the training takes place. There's very few forays to Henley anymore for the athletes that they do it to race once in a while. But the training program is predominantly a physiologically based training program. But I think I'm just trying to remember when it was, but it was certainly relatively early 2002 2003. Fran, I seem to remember there was some sort of stuff we were doing, but I started talking to the athletes about the people who seem to be able to manage the program best are the ones who look to exploit the training program, not simply do it. And some people would turn up and do it and kind of hope that the program was going to sort of produce them into the medalist, but other people would be kind of exploiting it. Okay, how do I make this program work for me? And so that sense of choice and meaning, and certainly the coaches and the athletes before a session on the water would talk about this is the session, but what do we want to get out of it technically? What do we want to be working on as well as getting the physiological benefit? So there's a lot of sort of adapting and crafting and sort of bringing meaning to it, and it's 3 to 5 training sessions a day, six days a week, and so there's a huge volume in here. So that was the bit for me, and which is the biggest mental challenge, is keeping creating value when there's so much volume of work that's going on as well, and that still being able to feel like you're making progress even though you're getting tired because of the volume of work. That was always a big challenge as well. And certainly there'd be points in the year where I'd be sort of, knowing that this has been a really hard training camp. It's important that the athletes are looking back and kind of going, right, how have I developed as an athlete? Because all I know at the moment is I'm exhausted and I just know I've done a lot. But, what's been the impact? How has that helped? How has that made me and us a different sort of athlete and crew? And there's that constant challenge as well. So, there's creating meaning in a session, but then there's kind of understanding the meaning that has resulted from the choices you have made even when you're at your most tired.
Because of course, this is the one bit of progress you can't measure. You can't produce on a piece of paper and say, I am better by this much. But, it would be the difference between, absolutely, any result. This is what it's going to boil down to, because everyone on the start line is really fit. And you're right, absolutely exhausted. But, the easy thing to do is say, well, I'll do another kilometre. But actually, if we could measure the progress that we make in the way that we think, then goodness, I think we'd put a lot more attachment to it.
Value through volume definitely sounds like a chapter in your next book, Chris. I mean, just listening to you both and what you said there, Chris, in terms, value through volume, and I was thinking of this notion of becoming participants rather than recipients, and that even though the training to a degree is top down, what can I get out of this? And I reflect back on my own work which is very heavily biased towards football, and that seems like a lot of my work on a day-to-day basis is because that's a sport that's where training is very top down, and players tend to be recipients rather than participants, and so helping them to see training sessions as, well, what do I want to get out of this? What do I want to do? And yet at the same time, having to do that, does place a cognitive load on you, a thinking load on you that leads to eat away at glucose and sugars, and so it can feel, I'm sure, could probably feel quite exhausting to have to do that every single day. Okay, what are we going to get out of this? What are we going to get out of this? And actually, in this chapter, you've talked about off the water fundamental pillars. I spoke on the Sports Psych show to neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett, who talks about the brain isn't for thinking, it's for body budgeting. It's for dealing with the stresses and the strains that your body has to deal with. And that must be so rife in rowing and training to be an Olympian, that you have to have these off the water fundamental pillars to I suppose essentially manage your energy. That must be something that you got better and better at doing over time.
Yeah, I had to be, Dan. when you're young, you can sort of eat up the training, eat up a bit of, sort of getting away with a little less recovery around the sides. But when I think first of all, when, I just realized I was exhausted from the pure volume of training, but also I am a thinker. I'm really curious about all sorts of different things, not just rowing. I'm not one to kind of normally sit around and chat about rowing all that much, even when I was doing it. And then when I actually look back at my very best performances at one point, I realized that those are the ones that I came to when I was in a place of just great perspective, and that rowing was a part of my life, but it wasn't a huge, it wasn't be all and end all. It was a sort of a through point. I'd do the race, and then I was really looking forward to whatever I was going to be doing the next week. And that open mindset and perspective was, I realized, a component part of my optimum performance, not something I treated myself with after I'd had a good day. And so that's when I said to myself, right, in that case, you need to prioritize it, not keep waiting for it and putting it off. And so hence sort of building up a list of, okay, well, these are, if being in a good place mentally is a component part of my optimum performance, what are those elements that have to be in place?
And I think, over the years working with the doctor, there was quite a lot of occasions when athletes would, not be able to bounce back from the program, and typically that was when there was a combination of both physiological overload and cognitive overload, and both mind and body were kind of not in a position to bounce back. When physically the athletes were tired, but mentally they were still in good shape, that was okay. When mentally perhaps they weren't feeling so great and a little bit rocky, but physically there was still good recovery taking place, again, typically, there wouldn't be such a negative impact. But it was the combination of the two for a period of time where you just saw the inability to kind of, find a pressure release and start rebuilding back. And that's usually when some kind of overtraining would take people out for a little while as well. So that the skill of keeping perspective mentally, that stuff's not on the training program. So you try and have the conversations that keep that kind of in the ether and people being aware of it. But if it's not on the training program, it doesn't have the same importance. And that's also part of the challenge here for the athletes. What are they linked and labelled to as the most critical skills to make them a rounded athlete? Well, if it's on the program, then it's important, and that's where we have to sort of provide some help to find your own path and understand that you've got your own program, which is a combination of that which is given to you and that which you are then sort of blending for yourself as well. Which again, you can see Fran was ever more confident to take this on her way.
Mm. But I think also this is probably the element, if you're thinking about teams, this is the element. You've got your physical, your technical capabilities, and then this part of it where people differ the most. And so that's where the highest level of understanding, tolerance, facilitation needs to be, in saying, okay, well, we all need to make sure we've got the right balance for each of us, but it might look completely different for my teammates. For them, and this was the case for one of my teammates, she needed to go out and be in a bar and see friends, or go to an art gallery, be up late at night. That would be the worst thing for me, but I had to completely understand that was the right thing for her.
I think that's fascinating, and I think that listening to you both, I'm thinking about culture, and I'm reflecting on culture as not just shared similarities. I'm thinking about culture as appreciating individual differences. Great cultures do both. It's about similarities, it's about differences, and I think the appreciation of individual differences perhaps is where teams are most strained, if you like. That we want everybody to team and share values and have a common goal, but not often do we talk about learning to respect individual differences within the team.
It's an interesting one from a diversity perspective because obviously you're trying to sort of create homogeneity in thinking and action in order to perform well, but so you suppress diversity, which is often some of the spark that creates the tension and contrast that allows greater performance level to be achieved. So in the pursuit of high performance, we often filter out diversity, which is ultimately going to restrict the overall potential.
I was just sort of thinking about that, sort of how I progressed, and I would say progressed from frustration at seeing differences to exactly as you say, appreciation and really wanting to lap it up. In that last crew in Rio, this is brilliant. We are so different. We are going to have so few blind spots. And seeing that was going to be so crucial at so many different points along the way, whether that was the difference in people's ability to tolerate the monotony of training and yet keep making progress, and those that were going to be able to bring a really light heart and a laugh to 2 hours before we pick up the boat for the Olympic final, and knowing how important each of those people were going to be. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I'm sure Chris would remember the first time as a team we did the Myers-Briggs sort of test, a process. And we had, the extroverts. Chris laid out the piece of string on the floor with the extroverts at one end of the room and introverts to sort of make their way down the other end. And I was firmly down the introverted end, sort of looking at these other people in the other side of the room having a great laugh and thinking, oh my goodness, they're making so much noise. But I can see that they're so different. My goodness, I never realized that. I just thought we just irritated each other. And then my teammate walked past me, opened the door, far beyond the end of the introvert piece of string, and went outside. And I was like, oh my goodness, there's people even further. I must seem loud to them. And that realization, oh goodness, it really was a turning point for us, wasn't it, Chris?
It wasn't, as much as things like MBTI are critiqued, that they are incredibly useful in terms of helping to appreciate these sort of differences. And I do seem to remember in that same moment, it was all the people who were currently pursuing the single skull as an option were down the introverted end of the continuous. It's like, oh, right, so you all want to be in a boat on your own. No surprise there then. So, the presence of others was something of an inconvenience. But yeah, all of that we did in terms of, just even the stuff, around what strengths do each of you bring to any crew that you're part of, and what do you want to be held accountable for, and while you're in the boat, what is it that you want to be sort of leading on for others to follow, and which are the strengths of other people that they bring do you want to follow and benefit from, and just a lot of that language around sort of valuing yourself but valuing others and looking to get the combination of the two, whether personality wise or some other way, was just a constant part of that move towards the appreciation of contrast.
Yeah, and just to back up what you said there, Chris, because I'm sure we could geek out over psychometric testing, and that's for another episode and another day. But I agree with you in terms of, I mean, I'm a personality science geek, as you know, and MBTI is critiqued, but we've got to get the balance between what is scientifically accurate and what is pragmatic. And I just love the activity you both talked to us about there. It was, it sounded like it was a real eye opener and gives people a good, helps people become aware of where they are, but where others are. And I think it's that latter one. We forget that these kind of assessments can start great conversations and build awareness around where others are. Just coming back to, I mean, Chris, you mentioned cognitive overload, and you talked about the skill of keeping things in perspective, which moves us neatly onto the next chapter around debriefing. And again, it's just another topic that could be a whole episode here, but there's two sentences in this chapter that I picked out. They're in bold, and I'm going to shamelessly steal these, Fran. I just think these are awesome. You say about meetings and debriefs, you say reviewing is good, deconstructing is not good. Let's talk about that. And then you say champions move quickest from judgment to action. Champions move quickest from judgment to action. Talk to us a little bit about that tension between reviewing and deconstructing.
Yeah, so reviewing for me is a constructive, it's a logical, it's a should be, can be at our best, was a very calm process. Come back from the race, review. Did we do what we set out to do? What do we want to keep doing? What do we want to leave behind, learn from, and discard? It doesn't play a part in our piecing together our ultimate race. Deconstructing was a much more emotionally loaded situation, probably closer to the race, in which we would just look at absolutely everything we did. But that's not constructive. And I refer elsewhere to the ability to separate emotion from logic. And so reviewing for me was this very logical process. And it is okay to have a bad day. And it is okay, even when you've had a good day, to say, that was good, but this and this and this can still be better. It's a level playing field between a good and a bad day. If you have that fundamental belief and you have that relationship between each other, that you're able to be honest in that review process, no matter how the day's gone. What, did we do what we said we were going to do? What do we keep doing? And what do we amend? So that they're two very, very different things for me, reviewing and deconstructing.
That's great, because on page 29, Fran relates back to creating an identity, and the 2005 Women's Code was zero tolerance, and associated with that was commitment to action, but also associated to that was just using the question, how well did we do what we said we were going to do? And using that as the prime driver for everything. So one, you have to say what you're going to do, and then you have to hold yourself accountable to seeing how well you did what you said you were going to do, with a view to kind of, right, we're going to do that. We're going to do that better than anyone else would have done. So that, that is reviewing, because you have previewed in order to review. Deconstructing tends to be losing sight of what you were trying to do in the first place, and then just trying to post-rationalize and piece it together, which typically happens from individual perspectives and a sense of what I think should have been happening, rather than a starting point of what we said was going to happen. So, just removing the interference of, everyone's got an opinion, but if we haven't decided what the sort of, ultimate reference point is, that's not very helpful. So we want people's perspective focused on the same thing. And I should point out as well that the meetings and debriefs chapter is preceded by a quote from Roger Federer as well, which I know how much Fran likes Roger Federer, so we should point out that Roger Federer did make the way into the book as something of a legendary, consistent performance, who actually, when it comes to perspective and evaluating post-performance, is just superb at it, of maintaining perspective as well.
Well, let's bring Roger into this. And he said, you can succumb to your frustrations or do the thing of champions and calmly regroup. So I'm with you, Fran. He's a legend, right?
Yeah. And the other thing he is the other thing I love about Roger Federer's philosophy is he says he needs his opponent to bring out his best. And that was something that really, really chimed with me. I think I may have actually talked with you, Chris, about it at the time when I thought about it. And this sense of competition, I've got to win and all of that. But actually, competition, not at its root, not meaning that. It means to strive together, and really understanding for myself, okay, I think that's more what it means for me. And look, here's a role model who articulates it and lives it, and is at the very, very top of his sport, doing that and believing that, and really engaged in that philosophy and holding true to it under pressure.
Yeah, and I'd add in, so the other quote that Dan pointed out about champions move quickest from judgment to action. So you see in him, in you, that sort of self-judgment is very strong, but judgment of others and judgment of us, that's there. But the judgment to action, so not letting the sense of either disappointment or delight stay with you for too long. And again, with the meetings and debriefs piece, we always had, for a long time, had this sense that we get competitive advantage from debriefing and learning quicker and better than the opposition. So, this is still part of the competition. Can we sort of set this stuff up so that you're going to enjoy the learning bit together, because you're going to be more focused on the right stuff, for the next race as well. And I think that kind of, this feeding forward on the water as well as off the water stuff. That's where it was just, the meeting and debrief stuff had to have a very important place in terms of making sense of the whole story, but telling the next bit of the story with even more confidence.
As you're both speaking here, I'm thinking about the emotional temperature of the team or the organization, how a debrief influences that massively. I mean, I don't know what you think, Chris, but I'm thinking about, again, I'm going to come back to this ego versus mastery orientation. And a lot of what you're talking about here, Fran, I mean, I spoke with, I don't know if she was a former teammate, but she was certainly in the program when you were rowing Kath Bishop, and she's got a book out, The Long Win, and which talks about a more sophisticated relationship with winning, with competitiveness, with performance, and that's a big theme through this book. And as you were speaking there, I was thinking about that sophisticated relationship with winning, competitiveness, and performance, and taking the emotion or turning down the volume of emotion to be able to have an intelligent review of things. And Chris, it's when the organization or the team or the group of coaches is so entrenched in ego, we didn't win, our job is to win, it's awful and it's terrible, and everybody around the organization has got to portray this glum face, and we come off of our points, we come away from our process, and it's like, no, come on, what were we trying to do? Did we do those things? Because maybe we did those things and we lost, and that's okay. Let's keep doing those same good things. And as part of that review, how well did we do those things? Again, it comes back to me, in very simple tones, ego, mastery, and getting that balance, but being very, very focused on what are we trying to do? Did we do it? How do we do it better next time?
Yeah, absolutely. Kath and Fran were at Sydney together, and then a couple of World Championships after that as well, and also Athens. So yes, teammates for quite a few years. Marvelous to get to work with such incredible people. So I think really importantly, Dan, it is this commitment to being sort of it's about outcome, but are we seeking to win and succeed, and more importantly, succeed rather than win in a way that makes us proud? Did we do the things that we said we were going to do? Because there'll be other occasions when people will get a win, but they are really disappointed with the performance, and 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 that's why I talk a lot about being result agnostic, and it's important to kind of go, it's fairly obvious what you want the outcome to be, but let's see if there is another reference point that can be more useful, that gives us the sense of, well, the scoreboard says what we wanted it to, but we still want to see how good we can be. And that's the thing with the rowing culture, I think. Yes, there's a lot of outcome obsession in it, but it's populated by a huge amount of individuals who very quickly had to work out, well, we've had a high degree of success, but I don't think I'm the finished article. How do I keep moving on here? What am I going to do to keep my growth going, even though, perhaps there is, the medal satisfaction might be pretty good.
Moving on here, penultimate chapter, fundamentals and technical fundamentals, and the book is very psychosocial driven, but obviously we need to develop our technique. Very much an emphasis, Fran, on keeping things simple. But interesting to me is when I read let me read it out here. When I was at my best, my technical model was ruthlessly simple. I'm going to mention some technical stuff here that not everybody would resonate with, because I think it's in rowing language. But you talk about put the spoon in with the hips forward and as much leg length as possible. Use the legs to accelerate the boat catch to finish. Press out, make shape. Do it again. So repeat that. And I'm reading those out because my interpretation of, we talked earlier about the technical cues you had during a race. These just seem to be a slight extension. They stay within one sentence, but within training, developing your technical fundamentals, there's just a bit more explanation here, but within one sentence. So there seems to be technical cues, but slightly more elaborated.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could pick apart the rowing stroke in so many different ways. There are many elements to it. I mean, believe me, you can watch it frame by frame, as well as the feel of it. There are so many elements to it, but it is essentially pretty simple. Like you're moving a boat, and for me, it was really important to keep remembering that. I have a lot of thoughts in my head, and that was the most constructive thing for me, was to remember, actually this is really simple. Not, oh look, there are so many other ways I can go fast.
That takes a lot of trust as well. And I think, I was talking to Fran yesterday, and sort of what became clear just looking at the book and reflecting back on sort of Fran's career as well was just, that increasing confidence to kind of do things her way. Whereas, when you're kind of early on in careers and when we're all doing stuff, we're kind of looking for the way that gives us the answer. And so we can kind of, achieve by following rather than actually having the confidence to kind of go, look, this is how I'm making sense of everything. So this is my recipe. And whether that's technical or mental, I just think that's such an important output from, the book here as well, that it's a reflection of a huge amount of self-awareness, but a massive amount of self-acceptance to then kind of go, right, and how do I then develop on my terms, and how do I perform on my terms? And that's where you kind of get the ultimate freedom to express yourself, without judgment. The technical stuff there, I think, is a great indication of that sort of growth and journey anyway.
Well, you talk about reflection, and moving on to the last chapter, the dreaded injury. And I really enjoyed reading through this, just on the basis of, I just think there's some great reflections here on the injuries that you suffered, but how you dealt with them. And I just think some of these little points you make, my injury mindset, practicalities of injury. It sounds like you built a plan to deal with any kind of injury that you sustained, Fran.
Yeah, I would very quickly switch into, okay, this is injury mindset. And I would always, even in the bit where the physio doesn't really know what's going on, I would really just want, whether it was really bad news or actually okay, that was what I needed to know. So, okay, am I going to get back in a week? Or, okay, am I switching into, right, this is an alternative pathway to making progress, and I'm on a different road now, and quickly switch into that. Okay, so what am I going to do differently in this period of time? Is it going to be 2 weeks or 2 months or 6 months, as it was in some cases, and use it constructively, so that I came out the other side stronger in an unpredicted way.
And that's just made me think about the numbers of times that I've sat down with sort of athletes over the years and drawn a graph of, right, here's the rest of the squad and the progress that they are currently on. You're now not on that graph. You're on a different graph. So let's have a look at, the path that you're going to create. When do you think your line is going to sort of coincide again with the rest of the group, because you've made the right choices about, this path, this opportunity? What are you going to get to do that no one else is able to do right now? And even though you're frustrated, there's some choice in here. And, and would often talk as well for the ego-oriented people around, look, now it's a competition as to, there's a bunch of people in the world who are having a rehabilitation competition. Can you be the best at doing this rehabilitation? And, all of those kind of things. It is about helping have a specific mindset towards the injury. People don't want to get it, but if you've got a mindset prepared, it's a hell of a lot easier to get a helpful response from it. If you haven't got that mindset prepared, you treat every injury as a sort of as a new threat and a frustration, which in itself is going to potentially slow down the sort of process of recovery.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember, for me, and I know it applies to others as well, not everyone, but, I found training in a centralized environment really difficult. I am an introvert. I really like my own space. I'm pretty sensitive to having too many different social cues. And so actually for me, it was really beneficial to have this time out. And I knew that in the back of my mind, that actually this was a necessary resetting opportunity, and to be away, to just be in a different environment for a while. And so I think that's important to remember for many athletes as well. Actually, this could be this could be a really, really good resetting time.
What you've just said there emphasizes the importance of self-awareness. And Fran, you conclude the book. It's the most sustained piece of writing you do in the book, because the book is neatly littered with graphics and illustrations and quotes in big writing, which I think makes for an easy, simple, wonderful read. And at the end, the conclusion is a couple of pages of your thoughts, I suppose, reflecting back on your experiences as an Olympian. And one thing we haven't emphasized during our conversation over the past hour is that actually you got to a stage in your career where you were burnt out pre-Rio Olympics and you had to change your approach, essentially. I'm going to read a little bit from the conclusion, get your thoughts on what I've read there, and then we'll move on to concluding thoughts for us all. You talk about changing your mindset. You say, for many years, I thought rowing was about training hard, following instructions, and making myself the best I could be in order to win gold, no matter what it took. But by 2014, although I had won 4 world titles and 2 Olympic silver medals, I still hadn't won Olympic gold. I was burnt out, and it wasn't the experience I had dreamt it would be. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we can move on to some concluding thoughts.
Yeah, so this is very much about that point in 2014, where I was lying on my back, swapping a hot water bottle for a bag of frozen peas over and over for about 2 weeks, it seemed. And I just knew that I couldn't carry on with this gold at all costs mentality. It wasn't working. The crews were not going fast enough. I was passing my frustration on to my teammates, and the frustration was making me ill and injured. And so that was the point where I said, okay, well, it's got to be about something different. I have to reconcile myself with what to me at the time felt like failure to not win, and to redefine what success, what the ultimate sporting experience for me would be. And that was when I said, okay, well, the very best thing that I could possibly imagine would be to stand on an Olympic podium. But the important bit would be to have my arms around my teammates, sharing what we had created together, and feel joy, not relief. So not relief that it was over, that we've got over the line and we've done what was expected of us, but absolute joy at sharing that moment and being able to look each other in the eye and say, this is what we did together. And that's when my focus, I realized, and Chris has alluded to it so eloquently already, how that was when my focus changed from being on the finish line to actually saying, okay, so what does that mean for every day? And that means, okay, if I want to have a really genuine moment at that point, I really need to know my teammates, and I really want to be working to see what can we create together, not what's expected of us, what do we have to deliver, but okay, what is every day about, and building towards something for which there's no ceiling, there's no pre-described idea. And actually it was incredible, because once I'd found that clarity, and that was true to me, it wasn't what others expected of me, it was what I knew was right for me. I describe it like a hose pipe, when a hose pipe's all coiled up and there's sort of water spurting out everywhere and there's just so much tension, it just completely untwisted. And I didn't get injured again from that time until, throughout the rest of my career. So it was incredibly powerful, that thought process for me.
I know that, Chris, you're so vocal these days, if I may say, on social media platforms, communicating to others about this kind of philosophy, that the win at all costs mentality doesn't work. It de-energizes us. It forces us to drop in confidence, and so on and so forth. What's your thoughts on what Fran's just said?
So what I was reflecting on as well, that I think it's always an ongoing journey, because there are so many other sort of influences that are saying it's the win at all costs. So even, Fran and I had a conversation in Rio where you're surrounded by all the Team GB sort of paraphernalia. You're both wearing Olympic kit, and everything is about where's what's happening. There's an opening ceremony about to happen for all this sort of celebration of medals that are going to happen, and so even the conversation we were having in Rio was kind of focused on, right, well now you're here, Fran. What how are you going to make sense of this? How are you going to keep sort of, some of the questions that are now coming into your head at bay because you've found a different way? And I do think it's really important to accept that there's a huge amount of energy and passion that comes from the winning stuff, but there's also, it needs contrast, it needs nuance, it needs individuals to sort of look to be successful on their terms, and look at also, there's a huge bit here around defining failure on your terms. I will have failed if I haven't done X, or if I haven't done Y. So Fran not being able to stand on the podium and put her arms around the teammates and sort of share the joy, that would have been a failure. So you can then start working out, well, what will get in the way of me suppressing those thoughts and feelings? Well, it'll be if I'm too outcome focused, if I'm too X, too Y. You can start seeing some of the things that you can stop doing, and that's the important bit, is when you sort of define something that has meaning for you personally, you can seek the success, but you can really define failure on your terms, to make sure that everything that you're doing is allowing you to thrive in your new understanding of what is important to you.
My concluding thought here, reading your book, Fran, if there's one word that's coming through, not a particularly profound word, it's a little bit technical, but sweet spot. That sweet spot between effort and relaxation, that sweet spot between ego and mastery. I'm reading your book, and I'm thinking about how much work went into the process, how much thought went into it. And it strikes me as well that what you figured out was, I need to do this, I need to have this stuff, but I also need to enjoy it to get the best for myself. Joy has to be part of this. Other positive emotions other than sweat and dust and blood have to be involved here. And when I get the sweet spot between the two, then I give myself the best chance to be as high as I possibly can be on that podium, enjoy the experience, team with others, avoid burnout, and be able to look back at it and go, yes, I did it and I loved it.
Yeah. I think where I found that sweet spot was when people kept saying to me, oh, you've got to stop thinking so much about it. And I tried to stop thinking so much about it, but I'm a thinker.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I literally just can't stop myself thinking. I mean, there's only so many DVDs I can watch and I'll still think at the same time. So when I thought, okay, well, if I can't stop myself thinking, how can I use these thoughts as a strength to my advantage? How can I use them constructively? And that's when I changed from the sort of first version of thinking, a sort of obsessing and unpicking, to curiosity. And I think you've already referred to curiosity, and adventure, and that much more open, expansive thought. That's where I found my sweet spot, because I wasn't trying to deny myself being me. I was saying, yes, you can be you, but let's do it this way, for this reason.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Fran, Chris, what a great conversation. Thank you so much. Fran, where can people get hold of this fantastic book? It's called Learnings from 5 Olympic Games. How can people find you and get hold of the book?
Right, so everything is through my website, www.franceshoughton, that's FRANCES, and then HOUGHTON, franceshoughton.co.uk. I've entirely self-published it. all of it down here in Cornwall, written myself, because I wanted it to be what was inside my head, and articulate that myself. So I'm afraid it is just through my website, and that's where you can contact me and find out a bit more about myself and the sort of stories that lie behind these learnings as well.
I love it. And I think, Chris, you and I would both agree that this is essential reading for, well, just about anybody, competitors and coaches. It's a real insight into the mind of an Olympian.
Absolutely, and and for anyone to be in a position where they can follow Fran's lead in the future and be as confident to articulate their own version of what it takes to be successful, that's the big message that comes out of the book, as well as all the brilliant nuggets that are in it that are going to resonate with so many people.
We're talking about nuggets, Chris. You've given us a small sample of your wisdom throughout the show. Where can people find more of your wisdom?
I'm still looking for much of it myself. However, so if you want to go to probably the best place, theperformanceroom.co.uk is probably where there's loads and loads of practical stuff, and also as part of the stuff we do at Planet K2, believeperform.com. Adam Morris, the website that he set up there with all the kind of sports psych and mental health stuff. Adam's part of the Planet K2 family as well, and so believeperform.com is a great place for a lot of the sort of most helpful sports psych thinking as well. So the Performance Room and Believe Perform, and then, as you said, Dan, social media, so Twitter occasionally. So
what's both your Twitter accounts, Chris? It's at Chris Shambrook.
At Chris Shambrook, yeah.
And Fran?
And I'm at Houghton Francis.
Awesome. Well, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that conversation, Fran. I love your book. I'm going to keep diving into it and shamelessly steal some of your sayings, because I think they're absolutely superb. I love learning from Olympians. So thank you to both of you for your time.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Chris.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.